Jackson, welcome to the podcast.
No, thank you very much for having me, mate. I'm really looking forward to this. It's been a long time coming, hasn't it?
Oh, for sure. But we finally made it happen.
Hey, I've been buzzing for this, dude. So I'm happy to get going. Talk about some history.
So keen. So this idea, this human element of power and control that so many of us have, and then you take that to the nth degree, and you end up with massively powerful and destructive tyrannical leaders, dictators, just the God complex, taking main character syndrome to a whole nother level. I was fascinated by this because we try and control stuff in our own lives immediately, but then there are people, as I just said, that take it to the nth degree. I thought to myself, what better than to reach out to an expert on the subject, and then what better to talk about the main guy, well, one of the main pillars of this whole idea, Joseph Stalin. Simple. Who was Joseph Stalin?
So Joseph Stalin was the leader of the Soviet Union from the 1920s, the early 1920s to the early 1950s. He was, quite simply put, a horrible individual, but if we look in political senses, a really, really strong and powerful leader. Now, the Soviet Union was like Russia, but a load of those other satellite states, the Eastern European states, so parts of what we would know now as like Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, Georgia, all those states, those countries were part of the Soviet Union. And Stalin was the main figure, like the absolute dominant figure within the Soviet Union from after the death of Lenin, who was the first dictator who oversaw the Russian Revolution, to his death in the 50s, just as the Cold War was really starting to come into its element.
With this idea of like power kind of being motivated by trying to take control over some level of vulnerability from a young age. Joseph Stalin's childhood, because we're only exposed to the horrible things that he did as an older individual. I'm curious, what was his childhood like? What's the context to the terrible freaking dude that we all know in the history books?
So Stalin, as most dictators have, he didn't have a particularly nice childhood. He had a very strong relationship with his mother, though, but he didn't really know what he wanted to do. And as most dictators want, they end up wanting to do something else, to go and be something else. So Mao Zedong wanted to be a librarian. Mao loved reading, and he loved books, and he loved education, he loved culture. We all know that Adolf Hitler loved painting. He was a fantastic artist, except he couldn't paint people. And then we have Stalin, who did go and try and join a seminary. So he tried to go and be an Orthodox priest, and he was quite he had a strong religious feeling growing up. And you don't join a seminary, you don't try and be a priest unless there's some kind of feeling there. But it just didn't work. And he ended up, bouncing around different criminal gangs, and then being enamored with this socialist, this communist movement. Now, what's important to note within this period of Russia is it was the Tsarist regime. So the Tsars were the kings, the queens of Russia, or more, the emperors. And these individuals were not particularly nice individuals. The Russian state, at this point, there's a clear line between Russia and the Soviet state. This is the Russian Empire. The Tsarists, the Tsars, we have Alexander II, Alexander III, and Nicholas II. Alexander II was a little bit more liberal. He tried to open up the country, tried to give rights to the serfs, the peasants, of which, Stalin had that kind of more peasantry background. He tried to give some rights to them. He tried to emancipate the serfs, give them freedom. But he got assassinated. He got blown up, and he lost his legs. He he died in his family's arms. And his son, Alexander III, came to the throne. And Alexander III was a very, very strong individual, very strong leader. It is alleged that the man could bend iron bars in his hands, like super freak in nature. And this man just went, do you know what? Everything my father did, the liberalizer, bin it off. I don't like it. And he really tightened up repression in Russia. So all these people, all these lower class people within Russia started to experience freedom. They started to go, well, maybe we're going to be able to do this. Maybe I'm going to be able to move. Maybe I'm going to be able to make more money. Maybe I'm going to be able to have a little bit more freedom. And Alexander III just came in and went, no, I don't like it. So you're having these cycles going off within Russia where people are like, oh, maybe I'll have a little bit of freedom. Maybe I won't. Maybe I'll have a little bit of freedom. And the people just get tired. And after Alexander III dies, his son, Nicholas II, Tsar Nicholas II, comes to the throne. And he is very schooled in this idea that the Tsar is the holy anointed leader of Russia. There's three pillars of Russia at this point, or Tsarism. There's orthodoxy, which is the religious faith, Russian Orthodox Church. There is Russification, which is making sure everything is Russian. There's no Georgian, there's no Latvian, there's no Lithuanian, there's Russian. And then there's autocracy. And autocracy is that overall power, everything's in that leader. And this Nicholas II is incredibly schooled in that, and he holds those views very firmly. That Russia is my country, I have been anointed by God to lead Russia, and I am going to lead Russia. But he's useless. He is completely and utterly useless. He is so bad that everyone's like, what the hell is going on? Politicians are trying to take power, they're trying to help him out, and he's just like, no. Rasputin ends up in the scene. All the nobles like, who the hell is this weird Russian priest from the middle of nowhere? Don't like that. He shouldn't be here. But because there's this weird political instability going off on the top, there is this layer underneath from these people who have been flip-flopping between what their rights are, what their freedoms are, who are being caught up in this message of freedom, equal rights, and what you can earn. What should the state provide? They're being caught up in views of liberal democracy. They're being caught up in views of socialism, communism. And Stalin is also someone who is being caught up in this. He loves literature. He loves reading. He loves this intelligent kind of society. And he joins in on that. And these communists kind of take people in like Stalin and try and use them to push this kind of message.
Was Stalin nationalistic or patriotic individual? I know that Hitler, from the start of his story, had very, very nationalistic tendencies, and I'm curious, was Stalin's, his motivation to get involved in all these, political rallies, etc., from that young age, they were motivated through that?
You see, that's a great question, because under fascism, as we know fascism inherently has nationalistic tendencies, because there is kind of this racial state that underpins fascism. Now, I do kind of have to hit this like kind of misconception that we have about fascism, and it's particularly an American-centered one, is that Americans tend to think that fascism is authoritarianism. Fascism leads to authoritarianism, but it's a far-right perspective. It's a far-right political ideology. And far-right political ideologies inherently have some kind of nationalistic, racialistic perspective and opinion within them. What drives communism, on the other hand, is ideology. And what is drawing these people into communism is the ideology and the adherence, the devotion to communism, and trying to make communism happen. Communism, is they kind of communists kind of have this viewpoint that it shouldn't just happen in the one place. It should be a world revolution. But under Lenin, they take this viewpoint of, we need to have a vanguard, we need to have a group of people who are going to ensure that we get to communism for these people so that we can spread it around the world. So it is the dogmatic adherence to communism that these communists have. There's a form of nationalism in it. There's a form of being patriotic and having pride in Russia and what Russians are, but it's not the central tenet of it. The central tenet is being a communist and following communism. Because when you talk to you look at some of these spies who were communist in America, their argument about why they're a communist and why they're going against America, a lot of people were trying to appeal to their sense of patriotism, and their ideological commitment is always far stronger. Meanwhile, you're talking to the fascists and the Nazis, their national view, their desire to save Germany and save the German people is always far stronger. Same with Mussolini in Italy and the things are going off in Austria. It is adding to this greater pride, which is not as clear cut within communism.
I guess if you're a part of that Tsarist movement, the autocracy, and there's not a heck of a lot, particularly if you get a taste, just a little taste of what freedom's like, and then there's a change in leadership, and then all of a sudden there's not as much trickling down from the top in terms of what you have access to. Communism would have probably been a pretty attractive idea. Where was Stalin in terms of the social hierarchy or the class?
So he was down towards the bottom.
He was right at the bottom.
Right. He was. They always noted afterwards how he had this kind of Georgian accent. There was a very clear idea that this man was not from the city. He was from out there. But I'm skipping ahead a little bit. But in Stalin's future cabinet politburos, he had a wide range of people from across the Soviet Union. They weren't all Russians per se. They were from across the Soviet Union. So that idea of what it meant to be Soviet and a Soviet Russian was that you were a communist living in the area of the Soviet Union. And the Soviet Union, like we have the United States of America, which essentially is 50 separate nations with 50 separate cultures, all coming together as one federal body. What we have in the Soviet Union is we have a collection of Soviets who are all working together under this greater banner. So there is a wide spread of different nationalities within there, but their adherence to communism is the thing that comes ahead. But Stalin wasn't always one of these top-ranking people within the Communist Party. But also, communism wasn't the dominant ideology and the dominant kind of goal among the people. A lot of people wanted democracy. They'd had a taste of democracy. Under Nicholas II, there were efforts to democratize. We have different prime ministers. We have different Dumas. They're opening up the electorate. But the communists are jumping upon different movements and different revolutions to try and get the end result that they want. And against the Mensheviks, the more democratic people, they ended up winning just because they were more organized. They were better equipped, and they were able to take the main centers of power. And when it looked like they were about to lose power, they shut everyone else out.
How does Stalin catch Lenin's eye? Like, where's this meeting happen?
So I think there's a misconception here with Stalin and Lenin that Lenin appoints Stalin as his successor. You know, we end up having this a lot with dictators where we think, oh, the person who comes next, they've obviously chosen. The person who, you know, we tend to think of dictators a lot like monarchs, where it's whoever they think is the next leader. Now, Stalin's key in some of the organisation of the revolutionary movements. He is organising and he is taking on a greater role within the Communist Party. But after Lenin starts to get ill towards the end or the early 1920s and he has his strokes, he actually warns against Stalin. He is unsure if Stalin is the right person to lead. And Stalin, what he's doing in the background is actually positioning himself. You know, a lot of people thought that Trotsky was going to be the leader of the Soviet Union. So these meetings that Lenin and Stalin have, and Stalin becoming part of the Politburo due to the role that he's playing in, you know, organising, financing, and helping the kind of grassroots grow in the communist movement and recruiting and undermining democracy. He is gaining his attention. He is being seen as a trusted soldier of communism, but he is not being seen as a future leader. He is seen to be erratic. He is seen to be someone who could be very dangerous to not only Russia, but he could be seen to be very dangerous to these communists because he is just so violent. He is such a violent individual. But he is, next to Trotsky, he is one of the most intelligent. And he sees the writings on the wall for Lenin, and he starts to kind of position himself as the protector of Lenin's legacy. So he delivers a series of speeches on the foundations of Leninism. So much as Hitler has Mein Kampf, which is, you know, as much as it is some kind of rambling, racist load of tosh, Foundations of Leninism is another kind of ideological body of work where this is where Stalin's going, well, this is what Leninism is, this is what communism is, this is what we need to be doing. And he is the one shaping what is happening with the ideology. But he's also, crucially, the secretary of the party. And that role, he is in charge of letting people in and out. He is in charge of saying who's going to be part of this Communist Party, who's going to have the power, who am I going to get in to support me. And he ends up, towards the end of Lenin's life and after Lenin dies, he starts to back the party up with his supporters. He starts to undermine everyone else. So when they finally go, Stalin, would you like to be the leader of the Soviet Union? He goes, oh, no, it couldn't be me. They go, oh, no. And then Stalin ends up being the leader. So he's incredibly manipulative. He's incredibly intelligent. And he's able to kind of wrestle where the Soviet Union's going away from where Lenin wants it to go.
He was able to control exactly what people read and understood, and he was able to control the amount that people read and understood as well, by the sounds of it. When you have people in his immediate sphere of influence, not when Stalin was the head of the Soviet Union, but that Lenin era where you had gentlemen like him being like, we don't support him. He seems to be a little bit erratic, not quite confident in Stalin's leadership capability. What did the Soviet Union, or what did Russia? Wait, it would have been the Soviet Union at that time because they would. Yeah. What did the Soviet Union, the people of the Soviet Union, how did they view Stalin, and did at the start and towards his taking the victory or taking control? Was he the savior?
So here, this is this is hitting this kind of idea that we have about Russia, that it's this one monolith. Russia's massive. Russia's huge, and information's not traveling that quickly. But also, not a lot of people want this. This is not incredible. This has been communism enforced at the point of a gun, and Stalin has been one of the people enforcing that. So the people who like communism, they're like, yeah, Lenin's great. We've got this great team around Lenin. Lenin's great. People who don't like him are like, well, Stalin, Stalin's enforcing or helping to enforce some of Lenin's repression. We forget about how brutal and bad Lenin is as a person and as a leader, because what comes afterwards is so bloody horrible. Lenin's not particularly nice himself. He's leading repressions. His people have, he's had the Tsarist family killed. He's had them carted off into the mountains and shot, and they're not just shot once. They're shot. So he's not the nicest of people, and the people surrounding him are not the nicest of people. So there's going to be this opinion within Russia that the people who want communism and like communism are going to be like, fantastic. These people are making sure that the people who are in the way of this are gone, and we can have this revolution. We can make sure that Russia is communism. We can make sure that this works for all the people. But then the people who are against him are like, well, what the hell's going on here? Like, this person is not a nice person. This Stalin person is making some truly, truly horrendous actions happen. But also, it's important to remember as well, within any kind of a political cabinet, any kind of government, the leader is the central political figure. So Lenin would have been politically more likely to be the center of his cabinet. There would have been people more left-wing than him. There would have been people more right-wing than him. There would have been people who were more liberal than him. And there would have been people who were more authoritarian than him. And Stalin is one of those figures within that cabinet who is more authoritarian than Lenin.
If we can kind of draw back the Iron Curtain, I thought that was pretty good. And kind of peek behind the Soviet Union when Stalin just gets into power. What was it like? What was he like at the start of his rule?
So Stalin has recognized that Russia is drastically behind the rest of Europe, and there is a clear understanding that Russia needs to industrialize, and he starts up these new economic programs. He tries to collectivize. He does become quite left wing in a way. He tries to go through collectivization. He tries to initiate several policies, but there is a lot of political infighting. It is not clear cut in this early 1920s period who is in charge, and it is not clear cut in how in charge Stalin is. There is still several of these revolutionary heroes in this cabinet or Politburo. There is still a number of Lenin's favourites about, and Trotsky is still about. And that makes Stalin's position a little bit uneasy, because usually when you're a leader, you want to consolidate. You want to be surrounded by your supporters. You want your men in key positions, but they're not. And what Stalin starts to do is he starts to go through this Politburo and he starts to remove or neutralize or annihilate or exterminate some of these political threats within the Politburo. Some of them go into exile like Trotsky, some of them get killed, and some of them are shifted out to different low status, low ranking positions. And as soon as these people are gone, Stalin starts to initiate some of Trotsky's policies. So he's aware that maybe this collectivization program isn't working. Maybe this collectivization program is causing massive poverty and famine among the working class people who communism is supposed to be helping. So he starts to initiate other programs to make sure that Russia can become an industrial powerhouse, that it can compete with Europe on industry. It's not having to import some of these key raw materials or import some products so it can carry on. He wants to be self-sufficient. So this period in the 1920s is very, very unstable politically and through economic programs as well.
Was there anyone truly loyal to him, or is this just motivated by fear? You know, yes sir, no sir, 3 bags full sir, as long as you don't kill me.
So that's a good question. So there are yes and no. Yes and no. So there is this in the 1930s. He does something called the Great Terror, where millions of people are killed by the regime, and the guy running it is a guy called Henryk Ugolda, and he is killed and replaced by someone called Nikolai Azov, and the Great Terror becomes the Azovchina. He's a midget dwarf, apparently. Stalin's not very tall, so Azov never looks particularly short in these pictures. But I have a feeling that Azov was particularly loyal to Stalin because his rise through the party, his rise to being head of the secret police and overseeing mass murder and terror is directly tied to his relationship with Stalin. And several of the cabinet members, Molotov, Kaganovich, were loyal to Stalin because they owed their positions to him. But on the flip side, there's no one else to support. There's no one else to go and rally around. There's factionalism, which is like having a split Politburo, having a split cabinet is illegal. You've got to have unanimous decisions within Stalin's Politburo, and those unanimous decisions are to ensure that no one's name is the sole responsible name for a policy. There's no one's name is being listed as being a dissenting voice against a policy. So when you have, during the Great Terror, Stalin makes sure there's lists of people who were executed. So in the death of Stalin, when Lavrenti Beria is going, kill him, kill his wife in front of him, blah, blah, blah. Those kind of lists are real. And on those lists, we have numerous names from the Politburo signing them so that they are responsible. So not only are these people loyal because they owe their position to Stalin and they adore Stalin, they also are loyal through the very fear of what happens if they dissent. What happens if they rise up? Because they know damn well they will end up on the list, and some of them do. And the clearest example of this is in the early 1930s. There's a guy called Sergei Kirov, and Kirov was the leadership rival to Stalin in the early 1930s. People started talking about Kirov as the next leader of the Soviet Union, and he was very impressive. Kirov is mysteriously assassinated, and there are like, Stalin is like, oh my God, this is so sad. Like, what happened here? Like, how did this happen? But the only way Kirov could have been killed is by someone being sent by the secret police to go and kill him. And there was an election with Kirov where they kind of lied about, like, Stalin had the vote manipulated to say that he won, but it was possible that Kirov actually won this vote. So hence why he's assassinated. So they've seen as well, a lot of these people have seen what happens if you are a potential threat to Stalin. So you've got a huge amount of loyalty because you come up because of him. And then you've got a huge amount of fear because you know, like you've seen the other guy. You're like, well, I'm not doing that. They're like, there's no point. And there are several other these Camp Politburo members to ensure that their loyalty stays towards Stalin. Their wives have been executed. Or their wives are in prison. Oh, their kids have been like, and their whole compounds are often being bugged. There's literally no point.
How much of the outside world knew what was going on? Like, how effective was the Iron Curtain?
So it's it is effective and it isn't effective. You know that there are the full extent of some things aren't known, and to some there's some information today that we cannot access because they're in closed Russian archives. So Anthony Beaver was one of the people who got a huge amount of access to the Soviet archives in the mid to early 90s, after the fall of the Soviet Union, when they were kind of opening up. So a lot of his books have got a huge amount of information about what's happening militarily, but there's a lot of it we also don't know because they're sealed, closed Russian archives, and you know, no Western scholar, for reasons we all know, is allowed in Moscow to access these archives. But then several books get out as well. So there's Alexander Solzhenitsyn's Gulag Archipelago, where he talks about the Gulag system across the Soviet Union. So the Gulags are the prison camps. It's an acronym for something that I can't remember. But you know, these prison camps, you know, some of them are in Siberia, some of them in the freezing cold. They feed people like the minimum amount of food. They get them to build like the Trans-Siberian Railway. They use them as slave labor. And then they have people like, this guy's one of my particular favorites. No one else knows about him. But there's Jerzy G. Glicksman, and Jerzy G. Glicksman writes a book called Go Tell the West, which is a story about his experience with the Soviet prison camp system. He's being carted across the country, left, right, and centre, to do these building projects, and he escapes. So the people who escape and are defecting from the Soviet Union are telling the West about what's happening. But the full, true extent, you know, there's things that we don't know still.
Wow. I was talking to Dr. Alec Ryrie. He's another historian in an earlier podcast. And it was funny because the remark was made that there's no greater photo evidence of the enemy of my enemy is my friend when you look at that photo of Churchill. Is it President Roosevelt? And Joseph Stalin and a couple of other political leaders at the time all sitting down together. Because obviously at that time on an international scale, Hitler would grab the world's attention because it seemed like what I'm hearing is Joseph Stalin was very localized in terms of the effect that he was having. It hadn't spilled out of the Soviet Union at that point.
So, on that point, like people are aware of communism and what communism what was doing and what is part of communism. Churchill, particularly, we know he said the Iron Curtain comment. Churchill had a really, really strong disdain for communism, and he saw communism and Stalin as one of the evils in the world. But he knew and he saw that Hitler and Nazi Germany was a greater evil at that time. And Churchill held that view, and then he met Stalin and he was charmed by him. Stalin was a very charming individual, and he even kind of charmed Roosevelt, who, you know, was the charmer. So, yeah, we have this very weird position where, like you said, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, where they knew that Stalin was bad. They knew that communism was bad. But they knew what was going off in Nazi Germany, what was going off, through Hitler and his rule, was a far greater threat and a far greater evil than what Stalin was doing at that point. And we have to also consider at this point that Nazism and Adolf Hitler were far more expansionist in their perspective at that time. Hitler did not hide his intention to take on Europe and to have Lebensraum in the East and to bring everyone else in the West into this greater Reich. Stalin, yes, communism is naturally expansionist, but he was pursuing expansionism slightly to the West through Poland, but he was not being outright and as forthright with it as Hitler was. But he was also on Hitler's side at the beginning. He only joined us because Hitler stabbed him in the back.
Yeah, can talk a little more about that. When they were on each other's side, and then what happened?
So they made this agreement, the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, and they basically agreed, we won't mess around with you if you don't mess around with us, and you take half of Poland and I'll take the other half of Poland. And they were like, yeah, that sounds good. We're each other's natural ideological enemy, but we want this, you want that, that's fine. Stalin had vastly underestimated Hitler. And if Stalin had read Mein Kampf a little bit closer, he would have seen the complete and utter disdain that Hitler had for communists. And Hitler was having communists round up and put in concentration camps and death camps. He had communists beaten up in the street by his SA troops and his SS troops. He completely hates communism. But there is a point, and I forget the year, but Hitler goes, well, I want that land. So I'm going to go and get that land, and I want to knock out the Russians. So he turns and goes and gets the Russians. And when Stalin hears this, Stalin is completely shocked. He doesn't know what to think. He goes to his dacha, his kind of holiday home, and he's just like, what the hell's gone on? He is shocked. People think that he's going to resign. They don't know what to, where's Stalin? What's Stalin doing? He's gone AWOL. This is our leader. What's he doing? It's only when he comes back, he's like, well, we got to go to war with them. We can't lose this. We can't lose this. He's gonna want to knock us out. But then, obviously Hitler gets a little bit overconfident. Hitler is not a general in any way, shape or form. And anyone who tries to claim that Hitler is this great general really, really is completely misguided, because he tries to take on military planning from his generals because he doesn't trust them, and ends up making several very poor decisions that lead to the Nazis being kicked out of Russia, being made to look stupid. And Zhukov and the people who are running that Eastern Front, as they're retreating, pulling backwards, they're dismantling all the infrastructure. So the Nazis have got nothing as they're pushing through, and they attack the wrong areas. They get moved from one area to another based off Hitler's whim. It's complete mess. And Stalin, working with Churchill and Roosevelt, is able to kind of coordinate, how they're going to defeat the Nazis. But there is a very big stretch of time where this Eastern Front is the only real sustained warfare against the Germans, because the Germans kick out the Allies and the British from the Western Front, and we have to evacuate the continent. And we're only really attacking the Germans through, SOE operations. We're going behind enemy lines and conducting, the destruction of key infrastructure sites, bridges, railways, tunnels, and so on. That, for a time, that is the only real substantial Western effort on the continent, except, we have Stalin and the Russians battling away in the East.
I'm curious because like earlier we were talking about how as soon as he got into power, he was exiling, executing. There was the Great Terror. Um, Political rivals, generals. Did Stalin kind of cut his nose off despite his face? Like, how effective was the USSR in World War II after he'd just gone on that pillage of murdering all political opponents? Did he kind of get rid of a lot of his smart tacticians and
Well, I mean, yes and no. Some of the smarter ones are still there because the smarter ones obviously saw the writings on the wall and were like, praise be to Stalin. But there are also several figures that he knows he just can't, he can't dispense. Like Zhukov was a great, great figure, great military leader. And Zhukov, does run some of this, some of this front. But when he falls out Stalin has him moved around the Eastern Front. So there is like a changing round of, where generals are, who's leading certain things. There is a story of a general, can't remember the name of him, but he walks into the room with Stalin and he goes, "We're making the wrong decision. We need to do this." And Stalin's like, "I don't agree with you. Go out the room, think about it again, and come back in." And the guy comes back into the room and goes, "I think we're making the wrong decision. I don't think we're doing the right thing. We need to do this." And Stalin's like, "You're going to leave the room, you're going to think about it again, and then you're going to come back into the room when you thought about it." And the guy goes out the room. He stands there, he thinks about it. He opens the door, he walks back into the room, and he goes, "Mr. Stalin," obviously this is a paraphrasing, "Mr. Stalin, I think we're making the wrong decision. I don't think we're doing the right thing. I think we should be doing this." And Stalin puts him in charge of implementing that plan. But, there's this.
Oh, that is not how I was expecting that to end.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's the thing that sets Stalin apart from some of these other dictators, is I think there are times where Stalin accepts a little bit of a challenge. If someone is so staunchly, I mean, maybe not from a lot of people, if someone's got such a strong, staunchly held opinion, he's going to listen to it if it's staunchly held and he respects them. Other people, it's definitely not, if he feels that he knows better. But Stalin is not a general. He is not someone who's in charge of military policy. He is not in charge of the military. Yes, he can conduct raids. Yes, he was, organising revolutionary forces, but he is not a military general. He is an ideologue and he is a dictator. The two are very different. And I think there are a lot of leaders, while Stalin does get very involved, there are a lot of leaders who tend to conflate it. Not that I'm defending Stalin. He is a horrendous figure. But there are a lot of dictators who tend to conflate the two. And Hitler, he gets involved in military policy and it goes tits up for him.
World War II happens, the Allies win. We're back in Soviet Union. Does he continue his pillage, his terror, and then all the way leading up to his death? What happens?
So, Stalin's one of these people who goes, does these cycles of repression, and communism has to have these cycles of repression. So he's just come out of one for World War II. He understands the country's kind of got to rebuild. We have a lesser repression. I mean, it's all comparative, really. So there is not as much terror going off afterwards, but it goes through cycles. And he is having to kind of refill this cabinet. At the end of the Great Terror in the 1930s, Nikolai Azov has been executed himself. The guy who was overseeing the Great Terror of the 1930s is executed in a show trial. So so there is this cycle where you kind of have to rebuild. Stalin has to get these new talents in, and rebuild the country. But he is also, at this time, he is sensing an opportunity. Western Europe is in a complete mess, and there are several countries across Asia which are a complete mess. So what he is doing now is he is supporting foreign communist movements and trying to build this Comintern, so the Communist International, and trying to support these communist movements in coming up and taking power. So 1949, the CCP take control of China, and Stalin is supporting that movement. We have the North Korean communist movement, or the Korean communist movement, and he is supporting the communists in North Korea, which leads to the Korean War from 1950 to 1953. He is supporting Enver Hoxha in Albania. He is supporting like Tito. He is supporting all of these kind of movements just to grow communism. Like I said at the beginning, communism is an international movement. You want to give communism to everyone, so that's why he's supporting these movements. So that's his main kind of focus post-war. But also, he needs and wants to develop a nuclear weapon. The Americans have it. The Americans have used it. He now needs to be at the center of this race. He needs to be as powerful as the Americans.
So were these kind of like, were they more so political proxy wars, or were they proxy wars, or were they kind of, like when he's supporting these movements, are these like little almost battles that are happening, or is it purely he's supporting them from like a political propaganda standpoint?
Both. So he has supported the communists in China to have a war with the nationalists and under Chiang Kai-shek. He is actually militarily supporting the North Koreans, providing them weapons. He does not participate in the UN when the UN is going, well, should we go and support the South Koreans in this conflict? And then other movements he's supporting by, this is how we develop communism. This is how we industrialize a nation. This is the movement. This is what I expect you to do. I am in charge of communism. I am communism. This is how you do it. And there are several leaders who go, yes, Mr. Stalin, of course. Thank you very much. Thank you for showing us how to build factories. Thank you for showing us how to do this. And then there are other leaders who are like, thanks very much for the initial support. Anyway, I'm going to do communism how I feel that communism works within this, works within this country, works within this system, because communism isn't. A lot of communist leaders have this viewpoint that communism should be done differently for the people. So Mao Zedong realizes that communism in China should be an agrarian-centered communism around the peasantry, around the countryside, because there's more countryside, there's less cities. He needs to recenter how it is. But he gets support through that, and he talks to Stalin about it. Tito, on the other hand, doesn't. He ends up trying to position himself as this separate leader, but like, I'm still communist, but if you don't kind of like Stalin, I'm your guy. And Stalin tries to have him assassinated famously, and Tito's like, come on, do better. But this is what Stalin's doing, and he's trying to compete with the Soviet Union as well. He's trying to undermine democracy in the West at the same time.
Okay, so a bit of a fact or fiction question for you. To look at, bring it back to a more micro instead of macro influence of the guy. Is it true that he would do things like make his subordinates dance for him at dinner parties?
Yeah. So
So all that stuff's like,
All that stuff. Some of it is exactly. But like, if Stalin's like, and you're having a dinner party around, you're around Stalin's, and Stalin's like, let's have fun, let's do this. Like, you've seen other people get shot, so you're going to do it. Um, the story about the standing ovation, which lasts ages, and people don't
wait,
stop
talk
clapping.
about that. Talk about that. The standing
So
ovation. What's this?
Stalin delivers a speech, and he gets a standing ovation after the speech, and people are too terrified to stop clapping, and the applause goes on far longer than a natural applause would go. I can't remember. I've got two figures in my head. It's either 20 minutes or 60 minutes, whatever. Either way, it's excessive. And people are absolutely terrified of what's going to happen to them. If you are the first to stop clapping, they feel that they're going to get killed. And let's remember, this is a country where there is something called self-criticism, where you every now and again you have to have an ideological meeting with your communist, your party leader, someone from the police service, whatever, and you have to say, it's a bit like confession. I've been, I broke the ideological, like, I didn't follow communism, I did this, I did this, I did this, and you have to kind of dob yourself in. But within these criticism sessions, you have to also go, by the way, my neighbour's been listening to American radio. By the way, this person down the street is running a black market sale on eggs. And then the children within this country are being indoctrinated in this communist system. They end up referring to Stalin as some father figure, some godly father figure, a bit like Father Christmas, a bit like God, in that kind of way of referring to him. And for a lot of these children who were born between 1925 or in the 1910s to 1950s or 1940s, Stalin is devotion number one. Stalin's devotion number one. So there are children in this country who are going to their school teachers, who are going to the police and going, my dad at home said that Stalin's a horrible person. And the secret police are then going to get the parents. The secret police are then going to get their mum, because these children have been taught that Stalin's number one.
And that was genuine love. I mean, if you've got kids doing that,
Yeah,
kids don't
ideological
understand.
brainwashing.
Wow. To almost like to push that a little bit further, the whole neighbor idea of dobbing on your neighbor, where using neighbor as the general idea of whether that's a friend, a father, like just the bloke next door. I can't imagine that everyone, particularly if at the start of this whole communist regime you had your communist lovers, so to speak, and then you had your opposers, a lot of which were exiled, etc., etc. Was everyone that was left, particularly at this time of the Soviet Union, all freely subscribing to this system, or were there still people that were praying for some sort of a transition of power?
See, the idea of freedom is quite hard to conceptualize within a communist system, and particularly a totalitarian system like Soviet Stalinist Russia. There's obviously some scholars believe there is a form of freedom, where you're able to, you know, choose who you love. You're able to choose who you marry. You're able to choose to have children. You know, you're able to do that kind of freedom. But what you're not able to do is you're not able to read everything you want. There is literature that is banned. You're not able to listen to what you want. You're not able to, in some places in public, you are not allowed to engage in the conversations that you want to engage in. So this idea of freedom is inherently a Western liberal idea of what you can do. But within these Soviet systems, it's what you're free from. So the Western idea is you're able to do things. You are free from persecution. You are able to express your will, express your religious views. Within these Soviet unions, you have certain freedoms that you can do, but things you can't do. So this idea of trust is massive within the Soviet Union. If you can trust someone, you can talk to them about what you feel, because here, say if I trust you with my bike and you go and steal my bike, I've lost a bike. You're going to get fined. That's kind of it. Within the Soviet Union, if you are trusting someone, not only are you trusting them with your innermost feelings, your thoughts, you are also placing your life in their hands, and they are placing theirs in yours. So those little conversations that you have, say if you share your displeasure with something Stalin's done, you share your displeasure with something that the local council leadership has done, you have to trust that that person is not going to tell anyone. You have to trust that that person is not going to use that piece of information for their own gain. You have to trust that that person is not going to use that information in a way that causes you and your family harm. And that's the big thing within these countries is it is so important about who you surround yourself with and why you surround yourselves with, because it's not just a little thing of you lost your bike. It is huge. One small comment can cost you, your wife, your children, their lives.
God, he really controlled reality itself, and everything around it. It's with this whole pursuit. It almost seems like from a human, not a humanist standpoint, from a human element standpoint, that he's trying to almost free himself from paranoia by trying to get a little bit more control, a little bit more power. And then in turn, he ends up with so much power, so much control, that instead of trying to free himself from control, he's ended up with so much more reason to be paranoid.
Yeah, he is probably one of the most paranoid people in history, because he has so many people killed, and he is so afraid of what is going to happen to him and his power, that his paranoia directly contributes to his own death. That is whatever's happened to the death of Stalin is genuinely not an over exaggeration. His own paranoia does lead to his death, because he genuinely has a purge of the doctors, because he thinks the doctors are trying to kill him. And he has got such a huge amount of power that if he says, I don't like that cleaner, kill that cleaner's gone by the end of the day. It's done. So when Stalin goes, the doctors are trying to kill me, get rid of them, Levency Beria has got no other choice but to go, they're gone. And Lavrenti Beria, you know, Lavrenti Beria is probably one of the most evil people in history. He is like a fundamentally awful person. He makes Stalin, in some elements of his life, look tame.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he is fundamentally an awful, awful person. And he is overseeing this new, fresh cycle of repressions that Stalin is looking at within the 1950s. And he is aware that this repression directly ties to his own power. So he is making sure that these executions happen. He is making sure that these purges happen. He is making sure that Stalin's enemies are annihilated, because he also knows that these people stand in the way of his own power. So, of course, when Stalin says to him, get rid of the doctors, Lavrenti Beria goes, the doctors are gone. Which means that when Stalin has this hemorrhage, has, you know, this massive, massive medical emergency, there's no good doctors left. The good doctors are dead. The good doctors are in a gulag, a slave labor camp out in Siberia. Like, you can't get these good doctors in from, you know, being on the edge of death themselves, in from Siberia to come and deal with an ill Stalin. And it is directly because of that Stalin does not get the medical attention that he needs in that moment. He dies through his own paranoia.
Isn't that kind of a funny paradox? Where you have this individual who's really trying to pursue power, he's really trying to pursue control of everything, and in turn, he's left completely isolated and alone.
100%. But it is the tale of all these dictators that you develop this sense of it's me against the world, paranoia, locking people out. You know, Julius Caesar, afraid of threats to power, he gets assassinated. Hitler is so afraid of what's going to happen to him that he ends up locking himself in a bunker and killing himself. Yeah, it is a tale as old as time that these dictators, usually what they're afraid of is a contributing factor within their own death.
What was Stalin's relationship like with his family? Because the only reason I asked that is because he's asking, so he did have a family, right? And the only reason I asked that is because he's asking so much of everyone else's families. He's asking them to put their parents' lives at risks. He's asking them to put their personal friends' lives at risks. I'm wondering, have you ever seen Man in High Castle?
No, actually, no. I thought I need to watch it. It is on my watch list.
Yeah, phenomenal. And just to cut a long story short, it's the idea that obviously, it's the idea that World War II was won by the Nazis, and it's looking at that almost dystopian future of what would have been if they'd won. And there's this part in it, I'm not going to spoil the plot, but I will tell you this one part where this high-ranking Nazi official, he's an American because Nazism has spilled over into the West, and this high-ranking Nazi official realizes that his son is handicapped. And obviously, purely trying to pursue the Aryan race, he's quite literally between a rock and a hard place, and he's dealt with this conundrum of, I can't murder my own son, but I totally subscribe to this idea that we've got to have this Aryan race. And the doctor ends up coming over to, you know, quite in a just like an uncomfortably gracious way, kind of like putting down an animal. came over consoling and goes to kill the son, and he pulls out the syringe and he kills the doctor to save the son, his own son, and made that compromise there. And then he finds out that the son, because the son totally subscribed to the idea, had volunteered his own death as well. And with Stalin's rise to power, he's asking so much of these people. Did he do the same, or did he compromise in his immediate sphere of friends? Or I guess he wouldn't even have had friends, but he definitely had family.
So Stalin's earlier wife died of typhus. He had one son from this first wife. His name was Yakov. He died in a prisoner of war camp. There are various kind of opinions. Did he kill himself, or did the Germans kill him? Either way, it would have been very embarrassing for Stalin. My son's been captured. Well, it's on him now. No, I'm not gonna. No sentimentality within communism. He's there. He's on his own. Vasily was, just he was an alcoholic, and he had to frequently cover up after himself. Stalin famously did not get on with him very well at all, but he was doting on his daughter Svetlana, and these two were from his second wife.
What does doting mean? Sorry.
Yeah, he loved his daughter. He tried to give his daughter everything that he could. He did try and look after her, but she eventually ended up defecting. She eventually ended up going to the US because she was aware of what her father had done. She was aware of what her father had done, and his second wife, he had an argument with her, and she killed herself. So this is not a nice. And we tend to try and soften these dictators by going, well, they had this really tough childhood. They had these things happen to them which cause such immense trauma. And I understand trauma and emotional trauma, close emotional trauma, has an effect on people. But let's do away with this kind of idea that this trauma is affecting Stalin in such a the man's murdered millions of people. He signed the paper. Clearly,
yeah.
Clearly, there is something there is a screw loose here. Yes, he is going to be emotionally affected by the death of his two wives. He is going to be emotionally affected by some of the things that he's seeing, because he obviously has a capacity for affection with them. But let's not get it twisted. These people are not normal people. They are not normal people whatsoever. You can't be a normal person with normal emotional kind of tendencies and feel, think, and love the same way we do when you have the capacity to order the murder of tens of millions of people. You do not have that capacity. Like when people talk about Stalin or not Stalin, Hitler. Oh, Hitler loved animals. Hitler loved dogs. Hitler was a vegetarian. He found the sight of blood really quite difficult. Okay, you're softening someone who has directly ordered the death of millions of people, and just because that death is mechanized and is done through a system of having people gassed in chambers and mass murder through gas vans and so on, doesn't make him any more of a human person that we can relate to. Me and you, my neighbour next to me on the street, the people who I see at uni, the people I see in London, when I go down for work, each and every single one of us are totally and utterly incapable of thinking, feeling, and loving in the same way these people are. They might see love as one certain thing, but having an argument that is so explosive that your wife decides to commit suicide rather than deal with you afterwards shows that there is a fear there. Your son is in a prisoner of war camp and chooses, I mean, he's in a German prisoner of war camp, it's not a nice place, but he chooses to commit suicide. That means he either knows, what's going to happen in that camp because he's Stalin's son isn't going to be very nice, and what's going to happen to him when he comes back isn't very nice. Vasily does cock up after cock up after cock up and tries to hide it from his father. He knows what's going to happen is not very nice. And these people in his Politburo who are close to Stalin follow his command because they know what's going to happen to him if they don't is far worse than what's going to happen to them if they carry on following him. So these humanization tools that some people use with them, and about the dogs with Hitler, the reading with Mao Zedong, the music with Stalin. What we need to stop humanizing people who display such inhuman qualities.
I find it uncomfortable. I don't know about you, but humanizing people capable of that sort of thing it's kind of like an uncomfortable mental exercise where based on what you said, it's almost reassuring in a weird way. I mean, I'm not saying that if I had that sort of power, I'd be doing that. But when you humanize someone, you do it to get some sort of a platform of relatability that you can kind of put yourself in their shoes to try and see the way that they perceive the world. And then, as you're saying, when you it's like Stalin and his poetry, his relationship with his daughter, all these very human factors, his relationship with his mother, his pursuit to become an Orthodox priest, none of that accounts for the terrible person that he became. But I guess on a larger scale, it can be not to prevent yourself from becoming the next dictator, but to see how decisions and progress in a particular area can, from starting at one starting point, can lead you to a very destructive individual, even within your own friend group.
I mean, I think what Stalin could teach us as people.
What can Stalin teach us as people?
I think there are several lessons you can take from Stalin. Firstly, don't kill people. I think that's quite a nice one. But you have to trust people around you. You have to trust people around you, and trust that people are there to help you and to get to where you want to go. Yes, sheer bloody will, determination will get you to where you need to be, but getting to the top there, and if you want to be the expert and in charge and top in any field that you're in, that place is incredibly lonely. That place is incredibly lonely. You ask any top sportsman. I love rugby. Johnny Wilkinson always talks about how you need to trust the people around you. And when he didn't trust the people around him on the pitch, he didn't play as well. And Stalin didn't truly trust people around him. And when he didn't trust those people, he got paranoid, and it led to his own destruction. So if you're trying to get somewhere and you're trying to be something and you're trying to be the best in your field, you need those people around you to ensure, A, you don't get corrupted by what you have and what is surrounding you, but also so you're not so lonely up there where you're going, where you want to be. Because if your aim is to be the best fly half in the world, if you want to be the next Johnny Wilkinson, who's miles better than Dan Carter and anyone else, you're going to get to a certain level of fame where people are going to have this idea of you, and they fall in love and want to be friends and love and be around the person who you think you are, that they think you are. And if you've got no one to trust, you've just got all these kind of people around you. But if you trust people and people come up with you and help you build to where you want to be, you will have that support network that you need, that Stalin didn't have towards the end of his life, because every person around him who was there from the beginning wasn't there anymore. He'd killed them because he was so paranoid. And the people that had been there the longest, like Molotov and Malenkov and Kaganovich, they were so terrified of him that he had a complete distinct, that's not a trusting relationship anymore. They don't trust you, even if you've kept them around a long time. So I think Stalin shows us just how corrupting power can be, but also how isolating achieving what you want to achieve can be.
Jackson, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much for having me on, mate.
Where can people go to find you?
So I'm at History with Jackson on Instagram. That's where most of my stuff is. And then through my my link in my bio, you can come across my YouTube for the podcast interviews, where I interview authors every week about their book, and then that also take you onto my blog and my Substack, where I write about global authoritarianism and how that's impacting the different countries where that authoritarianism is happening.
Thank you so much for your time, man. You're the best. Your work's awesome, and I learned so much today, so much to mull over. The best part is listening to it again and realizing how much stuff that I didn't even almost hear because I was fixated on an interesting point that was said earlier. But thank you for your time.
No, thank you very much for having me, mate. This was so fun. Really appreciate it.
Awesome. Have a great day.